Howdy doody buckaroonies. In this video, I'm going to teach you how to make wavetables that don't suck in only a couple of minutes. This process that I'm going to show you here today can be done with any synthesizer or hardware synthesizer and then can be imported into things like Serum, DAWg, Falcon, Synthmaster, Omnisphere, or any other kind of wavetable synth. There are some cool specialized tools like the program Wavedit which allow you to make wavetables, but the process I'm going to show you here today is pretty foolproof, very straightforward. It can be done inside of any DAW, and by the end of this video, you should be well on your way to making your own kick-ass wavetables. Now, ideally, the synthesizer you use for this process should feature a tempo-synced LFO or envelope option, otherwise some kind of macro control that can be automated or parameters that can be automated manually, because this is going to be important later. Finally, if you don't have some kind of wavetable synthesizer or perhaps need a synth that's also really good for making wavetables, you can download the free synth called Surge. I will link that down in the description below. It's really badass, extremely powerful, and very much worth having. With all that out of the way, let's hop into the DAW and get things started. Here we are in the DAW, and in this video, I'm going to be using Parawave Rapid. This is probably my favorite synth to use to generate wavetables because it's very easy and very powerful because it has a lot of different warp modes and other cool features. However, in this video, I'm going to be showing some concepts rather than having you copy exactly what I'm doing, so feel free to follow along in whatever synth you would like. To get the ball rolling here, we're going to create a MIDI clip in our DAW, and we're going to use a very low note. In this case, I've used C0, and we're going to make it 1 bar long. Now, the length of the note and the note you use can provide some different results, and there are some more technical approaches, but more often than not, I find that this exact step works. Just make sure you remember what pitch of note you use, and make sure to use a low note because that provides more details for the wavetable. Now, we're going to open up our synth and start creating an automation clip. I'm going to be using the macros here, so we're just going to open up Rapid's automation here and create an automation clip to go from 0 to 100%. That way it's going to create that movement all the way through to the end to create our wavetable. This makes things nice and easy because we can assign everything we want to move to just this one macro and we're done. But if your synth doesn't have a macro, you can instead use an LFO if it offers one and set it to a ramp waveform. That way it goes from 0 to 100%. We'll BPM sync it and make it 1 bar. That way it's going to go for that same duration of 4 beats or 1 bar from 0 to 100%. If all else fails and none of these options are available to you, you can just simply manually automate every parameter that's needed to create the final sound. Now, when it comes to creating a wavetable, one thing to keep in mind is that it's best to often use more subtle movements and things rather than a bunch of extreme stuff, because if you have a lot going on at any one time and it's just this huge amount of movement, it creates this jumbled, garbled mess, and we don't want that. We want something that's clean and usable. With that in mind, we're going to stack up a few basic processes that are then going to create a much more complicated result. Because this is a wavetable and we don't want anything to happen in terms of the phase of the waveforms, make sure you don't have any unison engaged or any kind of modulation effects that create phase offset or detuning, like chorus, ensemble, reverb, or anything like that. Now, to get things rolling here, let's add an effect to our first waveform. Let's maybe do one of these bend modes. We'll grab the macro and assign it to that bend. So this is going to take it from a saw into whatever that is, which is kind of interesting. So that could be our wavetable and we could be done, but we're gonna go a few steps further here to create something more complicated. Let's bring in a second oscillator and drop the volume of our first oscillator and then go to phase mod from oscillator. And this way we're going to create some FM. So we're gonna FM from A is basically what we're doing here. Now let's change the waveform of this from a saw to maybe a like triangle-ish sine and take a listen to that. So now we're starting to get something a bit more interesting, and you can see the final shape is a lot more complicated. For a bit of added interest, let's bring in a third oscillator here. Maybe we'll change this to a sine as well and add an effect type to that. Maybe we'll do just that same effect. We'll bring this up and assign our macro to this. So we'll add macro to the bend, maybe not make it all the way. And then we'll bring in the FM or PM from C, and that's going to give us something that's way more interesting and complicated. Let's maybe even bring this up like 2 octaves to get something a bit more harsh and screechy and see what that sounds like. Cool, and that's a pretty nice growly, throaty sound. From here, we could add even more effects, like maybe a little bit of distortion on the wavetable, so that way it goes from something nice and calm and clean to something more saturated and aggressive. Perhaps we could even add in a little bit of EQ to brighten up the wavetable overall. So let's bring in the high shelf and add some gain. We'll drop it down a bit. This way it's going to start at that nice dark round tone. And then we get into that more bright territory. We might even introduce more brightness by taking this from a sine on the third oscillator, something more triangle-y, just something with a few more harmonics. And now we've got something nice and complicated. Now that we've got this set up, we'll make sure our volume fader is at 0 dB and we'll bounce this out. So in DistroKid, all I need to do is just bounce this out post fader, but you might need to record this into a new track or otherwise export this or bounce it, freeze it, whatever your DAW might call this process. Now, the wavetable we've created here is at a nice healthy level and it's pretty consistent throughout, but you might need to use a tool in your DAW to normalize this or otherwise use a free program like Audacity to normalize that to make sure it's at a consistent and healthy volume. Now that we've created our wavetable, let's bring this in. Let's go to constant frame size and rapid. We'll enter our pitch. You might need to enter this in Serum or whatever synth you're using, and then we'll hit import. And if we go ahead and scroll through this, we've got our final wavetable. Now that we've got this imported, I've assigned an LFO to the wavetable. Let's drop this down to the lower octave and play that same C0. And we've got a pretty cool, pretty complex wavetable. For even more added interest and to keep going on this process, we could then maybe even repeat this entire process. So we could go through and resample this wavetable by adding some sync bend and maybe bringing in sine wave and FMing it with that wavetable and doing even more stuff to create something more like this. And I think you get the idea. It's a really easy, fast way to create some pretty awesome wavetables. And that's really all there is to it. This is a really easy, fast, and fun way to create some awesome wavetables with virtually no skill required other than just a little bit of trial and error. And so I think that does it for this video. I hope you found the video helpful and I hope you learned something. As always, be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys again soon.